In the middle of a vast cornfield, a hard-working black farmer was raising his daughter alone, relying entirely on one last harvest to send her to college. Suddenly, a terrible accident struck. An out-of-control car crashed into his field. He risked his life to pull the unconscious driver from the vehicle just moments before it exploded, destroying nearly all of his crops. What he didn't know was that the man he saved was a famous billionaire, and that one selfless act was about to change his family's life forever. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The morning sun cast a soft golden light over the Kansas countryside, illuminating rows upon rows of tall cornstalks swaying gently in the breeze. A dusty old pickup truck sat parked at the edge of a 20-hectare cornfield, its engine still warm from the short drive down a gravel path. From the open door stepped Isaiah Carter, a broad-shouldered black man in his early 40s, with weathered hands and eyes that held both exhaustion and determination. Dressed in faded denim overalls and a sweat-stained flannel shirt, he wore his toil like a second skin, sun-darkened, calloused, strong. This field, stretching farther than the eye could see, was not just soil and stalks to Isaiah. It was legacy. It was memory. It was survival. Inherited from his parents, who had worked this very land until their final days, the field was all that remained of a family history written in struggle and silent strength. Isaiah had never left it, not when his classmates moved to the cities, not when jobs dried up, and certainly not after his wife Miriam passed away 3 years prior from an illness that emptied their savings and left a hole in their world that no harvest could fill. From then on, it was just him and Alina, their daughter, now 17, bookmarked, big-hearted, and full of dreams too large for a town this small to contain. She had just been accepted to her dream university in Chicago. Isaiah still remembered the way her eyes lit up when the acceptance letter arrived, how she danced barefoot on the porch with the envelope clutched to her chest. He hadn't had the heart to tell her that he didn't yet know how they'd pay for it. The cornfield was his only plan. This year's harvest, if the weather held and the buyers came through, would bring in just enough to cover Alina's first year of tuition, pay off a lingering bank loan, and keep food on the table for another season. He had run the numbers 3 times. There was no room for error. No room for broken equipment or late payments or bad luck. Every husk mattered. Every stalk carried weight. Isaiah walked the field slowly, eyes scanning the leaves for signs of pests or mold. He bent to inspect a patch near the eastern row, where a few of the stalks had started yellowing early. He made a mental note to apply another round of organic treatment later that day. His fingers grazed the corn silk gently, almost reverently. He didn't talk to the plants like his father used to, but he felt their silence, their rhythm, their need. And maybe, just maybe, they felt his too. As the sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows between the green rows, Isaiah paused to wipe his brow and look out over the land. From this angle, the house was just visible, a small, weather-beaten structure with a sagging porch and mismatched shutters. But it was home. Smoke curled from the chimney. Alina was likely making oatmeal, as she did every morning, humming some song half out of tune while balancing a textbook in one hand and a spoon in the other. She didn't complain about the old mattress or the worn-out shoes. She just kept believing, in him, in the future, in the idea that hard work still meant something. He believed it too, even if that belief came with a weight heavy as the Kansas sky. With one last glance over the corn, Isaiah turned back toward the tool shed. There was more to do today, always more. The tractors needed tuning, the irrigation pump was sputtering again, and a stack of unpaid bills sat quietly on the kitchen counter, waiting to remind him of the world beyond the field. But for now, he let himself stand in the middle of it all, a man rooted like the crop he tended, holding fast to faith, to labor, and to the unspoken promise that if you give your all, the land will give something back. He just didn't know yet how violently that promise was about to be tested. It happened just past noon, when the sun sat high and relentless in the sky, baking the dirt paths into hard crust and drawing sweat from Isaiah's brow faster than his calloused hands could wipe it away. He was kneeling by the pump house, tightening a stubborn valve with a rusted wrench, when the sound shattered the quiet, first the high-pitched screech of tires fighting loose gravel, then a thunderous crash that split the air like a gunshot. It came from the southern edge of the cornfield, near the bend where the road curved too sharply for anyone unfamiliar with it. Isaiah froze for only a second before dropping the wrench and running, his boots pounding over dry soil, his breath catching, not from exhaustion, but from a sinking certainty that something had gone terribly wrong. As he sprinted past rows of ripening corn, a column of smoke was already beginning to rise. By the time he reached the clearing, the damage was clear. A sleek black sports car, foreign, expensive-looking, gleaming just hours ago, was now buried nose-first into the heart of his cornfield. The windshield had cracked like a spiderweb, and one of the gull-wing doors hung ajar, twisted unnaturally from the frame. Flames licked at the undercarriage, small but growing, dancing in bursts around the ruptured hood. The smell of leaking fuel cut through the summer air with acidic sharpness. Time slowed. The field fell silent. And Isaiah didn't hesitate. He ran straight to the driver's side, yanking on the door handle, which refused to budge. Inside, through the haze of smoke and glass, he saw a man slumped against the steering wheel, blood trailing from his temple, his eyes closed, face slack. Isaiah grabbed a nearby rock and smashed the side window with all the strength he had left, then reached inside, cutting his forearm on the shards as he pulled the unconscious stranger from the wreckage. The man was heavier than he looked, tall, lean, but dead weight. Isaiah hoisted him over one shoulder, stumbling backward as a flicker of flame erupted near the fuel tank. They were no more than 10 yards from the car when the explosion came. The sound cracked like thunder, a violent roar that rolled across the fields and rattled Isaiah to the bone. A rush of searing heat chased them down, forcing him to duck low and shield the man with his body. When he finally dared to look back, his heart sank. Half the cornfield, his livelihood, his season's work, his daughter's tuition, was burning in front of his eyes, reduced to orange flames and black smoke. Stalks curled inward like dying fingers. Rows of green turned to ash in seconds. It was all going up in smoke, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. For a long moment, Isaiah stood there, breath heaving, the stranger still slung over his shoulder. He didn't move. He didn't curse, or cry out, or fall to his knees. He just watched, not because he didn't care, but because carrying too much in that moment would have broken him. And he didn't have the luxury of breaking. Eventually, he adjusted the man's weight and started walking toward the house, boots crunching over burnt husks and smoldering ground. The stranger groaned faintly as they passed the tool shed, and Isaiah glanced down, blood still dripping from his own arm. "You're lucky," he muttered softly, voice low. "One more minute and we'd both be gone." Back at the house, he laid the man gently on the worn living room couch, stripped off the soot-covered flannel shirt, and cleaned the man's head wound with a damp cloth. The fire still raging in the distance cast a faint glow through the window, but Isaiah didn't look back at it again. He had already memorized the shape of the loss, it was scorched into his mind as deeply as the earth outside. What mattered now was that the man was alive, and Isaiah, despite everything, had chosen to save him. Not because it made sense. The afternoon sun had softened into a dusky amber by the time the stranger stirred on the couch. Isaiah sat at the small kitchen table, a towel wrapped around his bleeding arm, sipping slowly from a mug of black coffee that had long gone cold. Across the room, the man groaned, shifted, and finally opened his eyes, blinking against the dim light filtering through the dusty curtains. For a moment, there was confusion, pure and animal, etched across his face, as if he couldn't quite place where he was or how he got there. Then his hand went instinctively to his head, fingers brushing the dried blood along his temple. Isaiah stood slowly, his worn boots creaking against the wood floor, and crossed the room without a word, handing the man a glass of water. The man took it with shaking hands, downed it in 2 gulps, and finally rasped out the question Isaiah had been expecting. "What happened?" Isaiah answered simply, "You crashed into my field." Your car caught fire. I pulled you out. There was no bitterness in his voice, no demand for explanation or apology, just the plain truth, delivered like a farmer delivering news about the weather. The man looked at him, then turned his gaze toward the window, where smoke still curled lazily against the horizon. He swallowed hard, the weight of realization hitting as he pieced together the implications. That was your corn, he said slowly, as if trying to confirm the scale of the damage. Isaiah nodded once. Most of it's gone. A long silence followed, the kind that stretches heavy between men who don't know each other but are suddenly bound by something unspoken. The man sat upright now, wincing as his back protested, and looked around the modest room. The furniture was old but clean. On the far wall hung a family photo, Isaiah, a younger version of himself, standing beside a smiling woman with kind eyes and a girl with big curls and a grin full of promise. That girl's voice suddenly rang out from the hallway, breaking the silence. Daddy, is he awake? A moment later she appeared in the doorway, Elena, in a college t-shirt 3 sizes too big, holding a glass of lemonade and an SAT prep book. Her eyes flicked to the stranger on the couch, cautious, but curious. Isaiah nodded. He's awake. Bring him some more water. Elena stepped forward and offered the glass without a word. The man, still dazed, still unsure, took it with a murmured thanks, his eyes lingering on the girl's gentle face. There was something humbling in the way she looked at him, not with awe or suspicion, but with the steady calm of someone used to cleaning up other people's messes. Once Elena retreated, Isaiah eased himself into the worn armchair across from the man and studied him for a beat. "What's your name?" he asked. The man hesitated, then replied, "Alexander. Alexander Reed." He said it like a confession, not expecting recognition. But the name landed with no weight in the room. Isaiah simply nodded, unaware that the man sitting in his living room was one of the richest men in the country. Isaiah didn't follow markets, he followed weather patterns and soil acidity. "Well, Mr. Reed," Isaiah said, his voice steady but tired, "you've got a concussion. But you're alive. That's something." Alexander looked down at his scraped hands, still wrapped in bandages Isaiah had patched together from the kitchen drawer, and nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." For a while, they sat like that, 2 men from opposite worlds, sharing the same silence. Then Isaiah, perhaps out of instinct or pride or something deeper, began to talk, not about the accident, not about the ruined corn, but about Elena. He told Alexander how smart she was, how she taught herself calculus off YouTube, how she wanted to study biomedical engineering because her mama had once said, half joking, that their people needed more doctors and fewer debt collectors. He spoke with quiet reverence, like a man reciting scripture. And Alexander listened, really listened, for the first time in a long while. He looked around the house again and noticed the things he had missed, the envelope marked final notice pinned to the fridge, the scholarship rejection letter folded neatly on the table, the spiral notebook filled with Elena's carefully drawn college budget, circled and revised a dozen times. This wasn't a family scraping by. This was a family fighting to stay afloat, with grace, with dignity, and with no room for one more fire. When Isaiah finally stood to make a fresh pot of coffee, Alexander said nothing. He didn't apologize. He didn't offer money. He simply sat there, holding the weight of what he now knew, and feeling, perhaps for the first time in years, what it meant to owe someone something that couldn't be measured in dollars. He watched Isaiah moving in the kitchen. Watched the sun setting against the horizon, casting the burnt edges of the cornfield in shades of bronze and sorrow. And he understood, without being told, that he hadn't just crashed into someone's land. He had crashed into a man's last chance. And that man had saved his life anyway. Morning arrived not with fanfare, but with the low hum of insects and the earthy scent of scorched soil still lingering in the air. The sun had barely begun to lift over the horizon when Alexander stirred, blinking into the soft light filtering through the living room window. He sat up slowly, his body sore but functioning, the memory of fire and Isaiah's face the last clear image before blacking out. For a moment, he thought it might have been a dream, until he noticed the bandage on his head, the clean blanket draped over him, and the faint sounds of someone working outside. Curious, he rose, careful with each movement, and stepped onto the porch. What he saw made him pause. Isaiah was already out in the field, boots deep in charred earth, his frame bent slightly as he moved between the rows with methodical intent. The field was a mess of blackened stalks and ash, but Isaiah wasn't standing in it with despair. He was moving. He was working. With a small spade in hand and a tattered canvas bag slung over his shoulder, he was inspecting the damage with the precision of a man who had no time to mourn. He bent to check the soil in certain patches, pulling up roots that might still have life in them, breaking off melted irrigation lines to be replaced later, salvaging what little could be saved. Alexander stepped further into the yard and saw two elderly men, neighbors, perhaps, hauling away the husk of his ruined car, its frame twisted and blackened, the emblem barely recognizable. They worked without complaint, as if doing what needed to be done was reason enough. One nodded to Isaiah, who lifted his head just long enough to return the gesture before continuing to rake out debris from the nearest row. There was soot on his face, blood on his sleeve from yesterday's cuts, and a quiet fire in his eyes that made it clear he had already accepted the loss, and now he was moving forward. Alexander stood in stunned silence. He had seen men react with fury over far less. He had seen lawsuits filed over scratched paint jobs. Watched grown men shout over market fluctuations they couldn't control. But here was a man who had just lost the one thing he depended on to keep his daughter in school, to keep a roof over their heads, and still he chose work over bitterness. Still he chose to plant again. Isaiah eventually noticed Alexander watching and walked over, wiping his brow with the back of his wrist. "You're up," he said, calm as ever. "Head feeling better?" "Yeah," Alexander replied, his voice low. "Better. Thanks to you." He hesitated before continuing, glancing at the field. "I didn't expect you to be out here already." Isaiah shrugged, not unkindly. "I can't unburn what's been burned. But I can figure out what's still alive." They stood together for a moment, looking over the damage, ridges of soot marking where crops had once stood tall and hopeful. "This field," Isaiah said quietly, "it was supposed to be everything. Tuition. Groceries. Loan payments. Now I'll have to find another way." Alexander felt the weight of those words settle like stone in his chest. And yet, Isaiah hadn't asked him for anything, no blame, no demand, no anger. Just a quiet truth, delivered like a man delivering the morning's weather. Isaiah bent down again, brushing away blackened mulch to reveal a patch of green that had somehow survived. "Not everything burned," he murmured. "This corner got spared. Maybe enough to replant with what I've got saved. It's late in the season, but I'll make do." He looked up at Alexander then, not with accusation, but with something more difficult to bear, grace. Alexander could barely meet his gaze. He cleared his throat, unsure how to respond, unsure how to carry the weight of what this man had lost because of him. "I'll make arrangements," he said clumsily. "For the car to be cleared. The insurance. I'll pay for what Isaiah shook his head gently. "That car is already gone. Nothing to fix there. And I won't let this field die just because of one fire. I got a daughter about to be the first in the family to step into a college classroom. That dream still lives. I'll find a way." Alexander stood frozen. He had no words, only a growing certainty that this man had saved more than just his life. He had shown him something he'd forgotten existed, honor without expectation, resilience without resentment. And he knew, as surely as he'd ever known anything in his life, that this wasn't where their story would end. When Isaiah turned back to the field and resumed his work, Alexander quietly returned to the house. He found a piece of paper, pulled a pen from the kitchen drawer, and wrote 5 words that felt wholly inadequate but honest. "Thank you. I'll be back soon." He folded the note and placed it beneath Isaiah's favorite mug on the kitchen table. Then he left, unnoticed. The burned field at his back and something burning in his chest that had nothing to do with fire. 3 days had passed since the fire-scarred dawn when Alexander Reed had disappeared with nothing more than a handwritten note and a promise. Isaiah hadn't expected him to return, not really. He'd folded the paper, tucked it into his Bible between Psalm 126 and a letter from Elena's scholarship office, and gone back to work. There was still earth to tend, even if most of it had turned to soot and silence. He had salvaged what he could, rebuilt the irrigation line with spare pipe, planted late-season seedlings in the one corner that hadn't burned, and called in favors for second-hand seed. It wasn't enough. It wouldn't be. But it was what he had. And Isaiah Carter had never been the kind of man to stop just because the math didn't work in his favor. It was just afternoon when the noise came, first the soft grind of tires on gravel, then the crunch of heavy wheels rolling past the fence line. Isaiah was bent over near the well pump, elbow deep in rusted bolts, sweat tracing lines down his temple. He heard it but didn't look up right away. Folks got lost out here all the time, thinking the dirt road might lead to town. Then a second engine joined the first. Then a third. By the time he straightened, brushing his hands on his jeans, he could see them, vehicles unlike any he'd ever seen, parked along his fence. 2 long black SUVs. A flatbed truck carrying what looked like a gleaming piece of futuristic machinery. And a silver sedan that hadn't been made for Kansas dust. The door of the sedan opened, and out stepped Alexander Reed. He wasn't dressed like a billionaire this time either, no suit, no sunglasses. Just jeans, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and the same look on his face as that morning Isaiah had pulled him from fire. Isaiah's eyes narrowed. He took one slow step forward, then another, as if unsure whether this moment was real or just a heat-borne hallucination. "You said you'd be back," he muttered, mostly to himself. Then louder, incredulous, "I didn't think you meant this soon." Alexander gave a faint smile, then stepped aside and gestured behind him. "Didn't think you'd believe it unless I brought the proof with me." Isaiah's gaze followed the motion, and froze. On the flatbed, strapped tight with precision, sat a brand-new combine harvester. Sleek. Stainless. Spotless. Next to it, in the second truck, were crates marked with serial codes and stickers from brands Isaiah had only seen in catalogs, solar irrigation rigs, auto planters, tools so advanced he couldn't name them. Behind that, 2 men climbed out of the SUV with blueprints, and a woman in a vest was already unfolding a set of documents on the hood of her truck, pointing to the barn and drawing measurements in the air. None of them wore suits. But all of them moved like professionals, efficient, exact. And they were all here, for him. Isaiah stepped back, overwhelmed. His breath caught in his chest like someone had knocked the wind from him. "What is this?" he asked, voice low, the question raw and uneven. Alexander looked him straight in the eye. "It's your new beginning." He walked slowly toward Isaiah, each word deliberate. "I bought the land around your property. The whole stretch. Some of it belonged to absentee owners, some was county leased. It's yours now. All of it. I'm transferring full ownership by the end of the day. We've got crews coming in tomorrow to restore the barn and build new equipment storage. That's your new combine. And over there," he pointed to the stack of crates, "is a full precision agriculture system. The best money can buy." Isaiah stared at him, speechless. His hands, dirt-streaked and cracked, twitched slightly, like they didn't know what to hold on to. "Why?" he managed to ask, barely more than a whisper. Alexander stepped closer. "Because you saved my life and didn't ask for a damn thing in return. Because I destroyed your harvest, and you were more worried about my safety than your own loss. Because when I woke up in your house, I didn't see pity. I saw strength. I saw a man trying to keep his promise to his daughter, no matter the cost. And because this land, this dream, it matters. Isaiah looked down, trying to ground himself. But his eyes landed on the field, what remained of it, and the rows where he had replanted. Still fragile. But alive. Then he looked back at the machines. The people. The scale of what stood before him. And for the first time in years, tears filled his eyes. He didn't wipe them away. Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. And this, he said, is a 4-year, full-ride scholarship to the University of Chicago for Elena. Tuition. Housing. Books. Everything. No loans. No applications. No catch. Isaiah's knees nearly buckled. He took the envelope like it was made of fire and glass and held it to his chest with both hands. He looked over his shoulder toward the house. Elena was standing on the porch. Barefoot. Frozen. Her hands over her mouth. Their eyes met. And in that instant, neither one of them said a word. They didn't have to. Alexander placed a hand on Isaiah's shoulder. This is yours now. All of it. No strings. Just a thank you, for saving more than just my life. You reminded me what matters. Isaiah exhaled, shaky. Then finally said. I don't even know how to say thank you for something like this. Alexander smiled gently. Then don't. Just keep planting. And so, in the middle of a field that had once been reduced to ashes, surrounded by machines that would carry his work into the future, Isaiah Carter stood still. Because he was afraid, but because for the first time, he had been given the space to dream without limits. 3 months passed, and the land began to sing again. The rows that had once smoldered under the weight of flame now stood tall and orderly, neat green soldiers stretching toward a blue Kansas sky. The new combine moved like a dream, smooth, precise, silent in its efficiency. And Isaiah had learned how to run it himself, every gear and lever second nature now. The irrigation system purred in the background, drawing from solar panels Alexander had installed near the barn, which had been fully rebuilt with steel siding and weatherproof insulation, sturdy enough to outlast storms and time. There was even an office now, a small one, tucked in beside the seed storage room, with a desk, a reliable internet line, and a printer Elena had set up before she left. Because Elena had left on a bright September morning, with her backpack over one shoulder and tears in her eyes. Not sad ones, the kind of tears that carry pride too big for the body holding them. Isaiah had driven her himself, all the way to the University of Chicago, the scholarship papers folded carefully in the glove compartment, her name already printed on a dorm room door 3 states away. She had kissed his cheek before she went inside, pressed her forehead to his, and whispered, "You gave me the whole world, Daddy." He hadn't answered. His throat had been too tight and his heart too full. He simply nodded and watched her walk into the life she had earned. Now, the mornings were quieter, lonelier sometimes, but full of purpose. Isaiah rose before the sun, the way his father once had, and walked the field with his thermos of coffee in hand. He spoke out loud now sometimes, like his old man used to do, as if the corn could hear him. He spoke to the land, to Miriam, to God, and sometimes, without realizing it, to Alexander, who had not returned in person since that day, but whose impact remained in every plank of the new barn and every row of perfect, glistening green. His crews still checked in by phone, and his foundation sent updates, but Isaiah suspected that the billionaire had offered what he could and stepped aside, letting the soil, and the man who knew it best, do the rest. On one particular morning, Isaiah stood at the edge of the far field, sipping coffee and watching a family of deer graze along the tree-line. Behind him, the wind shifted, and he heard footsteps on gravel, measured, deliberate, familiar. He didn't turn right away. He waited until the steps came close enough that the silence between them felt natural. "I told you to keep planting," said Alexander's voice, warm and low. Isaiah turned, a grin spreading slow and wide across his face. "And I did." They shook hands like old friends, like men who had shared something more than words or contracts. Alexander looked out over the field with quiet reverence, taking in the straight lines, the healthy leaves, the glint of dew-catching morning light. "It's beautiful," he said. Isaiah nodded. "It's home." They walked together then, past the barn, past the new workshed where Isaiah had started teaching a few neighborhood boys how to handle farm equipment. Because giving back, he'd said, was just a different kind of harvest. Alexander asked about Elena, and Isaiah pulled out his phone to show a photo of her beaming beside a microscope, her lab coat a little too big, her confidence even bigger. "She's going to cure something someday," he said with a quiet pride that didn't need exaggeration. Before Alexander left, they stood at the edge of the field once more. He glanced over at Isaiah and asked, "Do you ever think about that morning? The fire? The loss?" Isaiah looked toward the far rows, golden now with early maturity, the wind nudging them like a blessing. "Every day," he said. "But not with pain. That fire, it cleared what couldn't be saved. Made room for something better." Alexander smiled at that. Funny how sometimes the worst day of your life turns out to be the beginning of the best one. They stood in silence a little longer, just two men and the land between them, connected not by wealth or history, but by a moment of unexpected grace. As Alexander's car pulled away, Isaiah remained, his boots planted firm in the dirt, his heart full in a way that no drought, no debt, no disaster could ever dry up. Around him, the cornfield whispered in the wind, and the farmhouse stood tall behind him, waiting for the girl who would someday return not just as a daughter, but as the legacy he had built from fire, from faith, and from the simple enduring belief that good soil, like good men, always finds a way to grow again. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.